or whether you want to use mixing valves, which will be a fun little project to go through, won't it, gentlemen?
Yes, it will.
So everybody on this panel tonight, Ted and I have been extremely, in fact, we met through the radiant industry. So we'll have some good little things to share here along the way, I'm sure. But Jason, what I would like you to do right now is to launch poll question number 1, please.
All right, here we go. All right, do you use mixing valves? Yes or no? Well, that's a simple one. I can give you the straight answer for that one. All right, where are we at on our percentage? 92 say yes, 97 say no. Okay, getting some changes there. All right, we're gonna call it 6 say no and 94 say yes.
Cool. So we have 94 people who are professionals and 4 people who are going to lie. So it's awesome.
Well, be careful, because some manufacturers say in their manual that you don't need it, but the local code says you do.
Well, we won't get into that right now, so because we don't have time to pass that one through.
No,
but,
you don't have time to beat that one up.
I will say if you're using a modulating condensing boiler and you're doing radiant, you can use the boiler control to regulate it. They're so good today. But that was a code that was written so long ago, it's impossible. But you're right, Jason. If I was doing domestic water, it is code. You must use the through a thermostatic valve. But we're not talking domestic tonight. We're talking heating. So just a
Although let me shamelessly plug that we include that mixing valve if you buy the S20W.
Yeah, and that's a cool. A lot of people don't do that. That's a good point to bring up.
Shameless promotion, but I had to mention it.
Hit it out the park, Teddy.
So anyway, the purpose of mixing valves on hydronic systems really is to provide lower water temperature to a zone or to multiple zones, like radiant heat, baseboard or high temp systems, snow melt, reset of a particular zone, outdoor reset, and comfort. So it comes down to providing lower temperature to a zone or multiple zones. We also want to provide for boilers that can't condense, boiler protection when needed, particularly for cast iron boilers, which is extremely important, or if you're doing snow melt on any boiler, because if you're returning below freezing water back to the boiler and the boiler's not firing, you could freeze the boiler. So you do want to protect everything with a mixing valve or a mixing station. So with that in run, types of mixing valves, of course, we have 3 thermostatic valves. We have injection pumping, which has become was a little bit more popular when 4-way mixing valves were $2,000. 2-way manual or thermostatic injection valves, 3- and 4-way manual mixing valves, motorized mixing valves, and we're going to go play with all of them. So no matter how you do it, and no matter how you decide what you want to do and what you want to provide for your customer, keep in mind the purpose of mixing valves on a hydronic system is 1, to provide a lower temperature to that zone or to multiple zones, and 2, to provide protection if needed. Of course, the motorized valves where you're going through the lower temperature, we'll do outdoor reset too, and we'll cover that here in a little bit more. Jason, if you would, poll question number 2.
All right, I'll launch that bad boy now. Little screen here. Poll question number 2. When using a mixing valve, do you use manual set valves, thermostatic 3-way mixing valves, motorized valves with outdoor reset? Ooh, I like that one. Woohoo! Woohoo! I like that one.
Wait a
Listen to these numbers. Teddy, you want to read them? Go ahead.
I'm not even seeing the numbers.
I'm gonna tell you these numbers are
For whatever reason.
44. Well, let's change them. Let's let it settle. Okay, so 22 of them use manual set valves. 50% of them use thermostatic 3-way mixing valves, and 28% use motorized valves with outdoor reset. Wow.
Well, that's fascinating. That's absolutely fascinating. So let's look at this manual valve setup. Now,
ooh,
I am not a big fan of manual valves to do radiant. All valve methods we're going to talk about tonight, all valving styles, whether it's a two-way injection, three-way, four-way, all of them can be done with manual setting valves. They can. All except for injection pumping, which we'll go over, which you can't do because, oh, that's right, there's a pump and you need to control with that. Yeah. So numerous times we've seen this across the board. I know Teddy and I and Jason have been in basements where it's all manual valves. I've seen it with condensing boilers. I've seen it with cast iron boilers. I've seen it on every kind of system out there. The question is, how do you set the correct outlet temperature? So, because every time you get along, the hotter the return water coming back from the radiant, the hotter the mix supply. So that means it's going to continue to go up throughout the day until the floor is so hot it makes the thermostat not the comfort for the room, and then goes back and, oh, that's right. So one of the guys I talked to said, well, Steve, you don't understand. What I do is I turn the radiant on for 2 hours until my return temperature is within 10 degrees. And then I turn the boiler on at 180 and then I manually mix it. And I said, well, that's great, but what happens if it's a colder day? And he says, what do you mean? I said, well, what happens if it's a colder day? He says, well, that won't affect it. I said, well, sure, because it's going to be colder in the room. It's going to take more BTUs. It's going to drop your temperature. You're not giving it enough. So how are you going to do it? And he couldn't answer that. So the hotter the boiler, the hotter the mixed water temperature. I'll tell you the advantage is you are the cheapest.
Where the hell did you get that picture? Dave Aldorf?
No, that's my cheapest bidder right there, folks. The advantage is you are absolutely the cheapest bidder. The disadvantage is you're almost at one temperature if you wait long enough until it's set, but I'm telling you, it ain't happening. You just happen to set it. And then the worst thing is people come in and start screwing these valves because there's nothing to stop them from moving. And you have no idea where it's going to be later. I mean, I've been in houses, and I'm sure you have too, Ted, where it had manual valves with marble floors where you can't heat that marble floor up over 85 degrees. You're going to start buckling the marble. And I literally burnt my feet looking at the thermostat because of the valve system. So not a healthy, not a good way to go, folks. Not in my opinion. So, and this is all based on having the exact same outdoor temperature as when you set it. Isn't that interesting? So do you go back in the winter and reset it? What's that, Ted?
When you set a manual valve, it's only good at that instant.
Yeah.
As the temperature goes up, it's inversely effective. As the temperature goes up, the supply water gets warmer. As the temperature goes down, the supply water gets colder because it's extracting more BTUs. So in the end, it's working exactly the opposite of the way you want it to if it's a single set system.
Exactly. So ultimately, you really have no control. And I can't tell you that there's none of us on this screen, on your screens right now, that would advocate using manual valves ever. Maybe when you first put them in so that somebody doesn't break a valve on you, a motorized valve, or you don't have the control yet, maybe, but very temporarily until you get this shit together. So anyway, so on we go. So now let's look. Oh, sorry, I just went through right too fast, didn't I? So now let's talk about three-way thermostatic valves. And three-way thermostatic valves became ever popular back in the day, where we were selling $600 worth of tubing and $4,000 worth of controls to be able to take care of that tubing. Ted remembers these days when we had four-way motorized valves by Tecmar, where just the head, just the motor for that valve, which could turn a VW if you put it on a plate, that body and that housing and the head were $1,500 back then. It was crazy. Then you had to put pumps on either side. You used primary, secondary because of cast iron boilers because you had to protect them. It was crazy. And someone came along and said, yeah, but these work. These work great. These are fabulous. Oh, boy. And nobody ever looked at them. Everybody just sucked the Kool-Aid and jumped right in. I mean,
Yeah.
Didn't they, Ted? I mean, everybody just jumped right on this thing. So here's your cast iron boiler. Here's your domestic water heater. Here's your zones going off. Here's your expansion tank. Here's my, if I want to call it this, the primary loop or the pump that's going to protect the boiler. That's going to, anytime the radiant calls, this pump, the radiant pump, and the pump on the main line come on together. So you have enough flow going around here so the boiler can't see that cold water. It can't drop below 130. Then you have this three-way thermostatic valve that it's trying to pull through, mixing the cold water coming back and the hot water coming in. So good in theory. Here it is again, now using a primary pump on a primary loop, the way we used to do it with cast iron boilers, where the loop is just spinning around and around and around, having a great time, and anything calls at all. The boiler injects itself into the system through its circulator. When the indirect comes on, the system, the primary pump goes off, and the indirect water heater pump comes on. When that's satisfied, this pump comes back on and goes around, and you have two high temperature zones with two closely spaced T's, so that can only get flow when pump's running. And then of course you have your radiant zone on last, because you wanted the coldest thing on last, so that the hottest water got the things that needed the hottest water, and you had the coolest water going to the radiant heat with the three-way mixing valve. So these are all things that Ted and I have designed forever. But now we get into condensing boilers. And here's a condensing boiler. Of course, now our indirect is off the side. We're taking it off the bottom so that this pump goes on, the boiler pump goes off, so it's giving priority to the indirect. As soon as that's satisfied, the pump then on the main comes on and allows water to come up. But now look, we don't have a primary loop anymore because we don't need it, because we don't care with a condensing boiler if you send it 110 degree or 90 degree water back to it. We don't care. So now this circulator can do its gig, go through the three-way mixing valve, but there's some inherent problems with three-way mixing valves.
You know, that was really nice of you to put if you go back, to put the manufacturer's circular model number. That was really nice of you to do that. Wow. Yeah, you are. What's the E7?
These are all jobs I've done. So of course that particular job had those particular circulators on. So anyway, so here's your three-way mixing valve, thermostatic. So you know, we're trying to send 130 degree out with 180 degree coming out from the boiler, trying to send 130 degree out with 120 coming back in. But the reality of it is you're not going to see that 130 unless you have the perfect conditions. And the biggest problem is that three-way mixing valves don't work that well with it. First, let's look at the flow and head of a three-way mixing valve. If I took out an AM101C, which is the most popular Honeywell 3/4 inch thermostatic mixing valve on the market, I get that has on the side it's stamped for a CV of 2.6. Now, if you don't know what a CV factor is, a CV factor is the GPM through the valve with 1 PSI drop. So that's the flow through that mixing valve with 1 PSI drop. 1 PSI is equal to 2.7 feet ahead. And CV is not linear, so the change is not linear. So if I double the flow, I quad the head. So if I take that 2.6 and make it 5.2 GPM, I don't have 1 PSI of drop, I have 4 PSI drop. Or in other words, 6 loops of radiant, which is equal to about 5 gallons a minute, would mean you have 9.2 feet ahead. You have to add to the head of the system just in order to get that valve going and to get the design temperatures you wanted. Of course, we're assuming you're designing your radiant as you should, but this means it takes you well beyond using a less expensive circulator and makes you use something like a 009 or one of these fancy ECMs, huge pumps that can do huge head and small GPM. So no, that's going to happen. So some other setback, the pros of using a three-way mixing valve is it's inexpensive. S and S. Now you might not know what S and S is, but that stands for small and stupid, because the valve can't think. So the cons: 1 temperature, no outdoor reset. And I say 1 temperature, and really that's tongue in cheek, because all of them have a 17 to 26 degree differential going through them. So depending on what your return temperature is and depending on what your supply temperature is, that temperature is going to vary. When you dial it in, if you ever notice on a thermostatic valve, there's no degrees on it. It's numbered 1 through 5. And the reason for the 1 through 5 is because, oh, that's right, depending on what you're supplying on the cold water and depending on what you're supplying on the hot water, it's going to change the output. So it's a chase the tail temperature, much like a manual valve. The closer you want it set, the hotter the return coming in, the hotter the temperature is going out. and the flow and head requires you to use a much bigger pump. Done it. More circulator money. And back in the day when 3-way thermostatic valves were $40, that was one thing, but they ain't $40 no more, are they, guys?
Hey, that's why for all those years they didn't use their true valve on a boiler bypass or system bypass. They should have used the globe valve. Everybody just used the ball valve because it was cheaper. You know what I mean? It's
That's what-
freaking cheaper. Well, what's a globe valve in the old days used to cost what? 30, $40? What's a ball valve cost?
No.
15?
That was never that much of a difference. But anyway, but you're close. Yeah. What's that?
Let me say this. At the end of the day, really, a thermostatic valve is still giving you one relatively fixed outlet temperature. So
Mhm.
you're not doing, you have to basically set it for the worst case scenario. And so you're losing a tremendous degree of efficiency there.
And a tremendous amount of comfort too, eh, Ted?
That's a fact. Because you have, largely, partially because you have that huge fluctuation you were just describing, and also because 90% of the time it's going to be set too high, because
Yeah.
you've for design temperature basically.
Well, and I'm going to coin a phrase from Barba. That's the anti-contractor callback mode. Is set it too high so you don't get a callback. Use the
Turn it
biggest,
up to the highest speed.
use the biggest base mounted pump you can,
Turn it
and
up
set the
high
temperature
speed.
as high as you can. Right. So.
I just-
Anyway, what's that?
It's a question of what you're trying to achieve. I mean, if you're looking for a comfortable, efficient system, or if you're looking to just protect yourself from, overheating.
Exactly. But that valve was very common amongst people trying to do less expensive jobs and
Mhm.
provide the same, say they were providing the same comfort. And unfortunately, the people getting it didn't know. And do they work? Yes, they work. Would I use them? Well, you'll find that out later, but they work. So now let's look at injection injection pumping. So here's two ways of injection pumping. To do injection pumping, you have to have a control. This one on the left-hand side, it's a panel made by Watts Radiant that comes with the Techmark control already installed. You can see the pump, the injection valve here in the middle with two closely spaced T's on the out and two closely spaced T's on the in. And of course, then you had the Taco mixing block that is two pumps built into one, your primary pump, which would be on this line on the system. And of course, the pump for the radiant heat, you have your supply and return on one side, supply and return on the other, and the controls built in. So it all depends what you're looking for. With Watts, you can order it with 3 or 6 zones, or up to 6 zones. And with Taco, you have to build your zones. So pretty cool. So let's look at this. So I've taken a lot of some of these drawings out directly from people like Techmar and Taco. And some of mine, you'll be able to tell it different. Mine's are in color and theirs are in black and white. But here's the 361 manual where they show the boiler pump, which is going to protect the boiler by having enough flow to mix the water coming back in. Here you have your pump in the middle for your injection that's going to pull the water off the hot loop and inject it into the cool water loop. And then you have sensors on both sides. One's to keep the boiler safe. The other one is to keep the water within outdoor reset going out. And then you have your zone valves going. So that's their way of doing it. Here's another way to do it. Here I'm using a zone valve as the primary. I just have one single pump on the system pumping out to it. When any of the zones open, the water goes through. Of course, when this zone opens, it gives us our protection going back to the boiler, even though I don't need it because that's a condensing boiler in there. And then we have the injection pump with two closely spaced T's on either side going out to the radiant heat. So same thing, different way to do it. But now let's look at how it works. So here's your variable speed pump in the middle, right? And you have your primary side, which is your from the boiler and to the boiler. You have your radiant heat side, which is of course to and from the radiant as marked. So your primary side and your secondary side, for people who like to say primary, secondary circulation, here it is. So two closely spaced T's on either side. So unless you have that pump in the middle turning, there's no flow through this. I have a globe valve on the return. Thank you, Jason, for bringing up globe valves. This is not a ball valve. This is a globe valve. That's mandatory so you can give the pump here some sort of head so it can actually pump, because a pump with no head doesn't work. So now we take it and we have to look at, whoa, Jason, what are you doing, pal?
Sorry about that.
So anyway, so here's the formula to figure out your injection pump. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of math here. It's not real hard to do. Don't let it freak you out, but take a picture of this, because F1 is your flow one, or what your flow is through the radiant. And here we know it's 12 GPM because we actually did the design. Delta TS is the difference between your supply and return. And here I'm using 10 degrees because I'm running a radiant heat system. Then on the bottom is your temperature one, or what's coming from your boiler, times your temperature you return, which is the return of your radiant heat system. So though it sounds like a lot, when you start to fill it in, it really isn't hard. You got your flow of one is 12 gallon a minute, your delta T is 10. You're going to divide that by 180 times 120, and that's going to give you your flow, or 120 divided by 60. So here's a system that needs 12 gallons a minute, that to maintain 130 degrees on the coldest day of the year only needs 2 gallon a minute flow at very little head, or what would be a 007 circulator. Now, please note I say 007 because you cannot use an ECM pump as an injection pump. Let me say that again. You cannot use an ECM pump for an injection pump. So, advantages of injection pumping: it's less expensive than the original 4 mixing valves. We have those cool things like the Takeo mixing block. You can satisfy, it's more money to through a thermostatic valve like any other thing. It can handle larger flows, and it can be adjustable flows because it will just inject enough to make up for what you need, and it has less pressure drop across it. You can adapt to increase and decreased flows. You can use outdoor reset, which is really nice because now you're going to give the people not ultimate comfort, but then ultimate savings also, and gives you boiler protection. So all these things are pretty cool, but the disadvantages are cost. Ted, question.
You left out one major advantage for which,
Oh, what's that?
for which injection pumping was known, is that injection loop doesn't have to be short like it is in the drawing. That loop could be 200 feet long. So if you were trying to mix at a station that was not close to the boiler, you could run 2 relatively short or small diameter lines out a long distance and create that mixed temperature, whatever, 150, 200 feet away.
You're right, Ted, and I can't tell you how many times I've designed that just for, you put that addition on that's, 200 feet away from the boiler, where they were going to have to run 1.25 inches back to the boiler room, and I'm sending 1/2 inch.
Yeah, they want to make it radiant floor because it's, a bonus room over a garage or something, and this is a great way to do it. Probably the best, because you're only running 2 very, small diameter pipes, as opposed to, if you mix back at the boiler, so to speak, you're running full size pipes.
Yeah, great point, Ted. Great point.
So it's a cost savings and convenience.
So
disadvantages in my mind is cost, because you have to include an external control.
Steve, before you go any further, there are some questions in here. Well, there's some comments here. So let me just go through a couple of these. First one, Bernie says, considering mud may be in the boiler, going back and plugging a mixing valve. That's also something to consider. And then Milik would like to know, here we go. Why can't I use an ECM pump for an injection pump?
Because the injection pump does not have it varies the voltage going to the circulator, and an ECM pump does not like a variable voltage going to it, which is why you can't use it. And if you talk to any circulator manufacturer, they will tell you, let's see if this works, not to use an ECM pump. So this is a point that came to me in a conversation the other day with a certain company, and I won't, probably rhymes with Takeo. They said, make sure I make this point, because they get more phone calls of people trying to use ECM pumps, which vary their output based on amperage draw, based on what's pulling and not. And now if I drop the voltage, I increase amperage, and the pump doesn't know what to do, they don't work on a mixing control. So you cannot use an ECM pump on a variable speed system. Ted, you look like you had something to say.
I did, actually. I was going to say, actually, you're best with just the smallest, most inexpensive pump you can put in there, because invariably there's too much head, and that's why you need the globe valve.
Well, and that's it. Yeah, and that's why I showed a 12 gallon a minute system needing less than 2 gallons a minute of injection. I mean,
At design.
at design temperature. I mean, the rest of the year it's less, right? So that's when it's 0 degrees outside or 14 degrees depending on where you live. Yeah,
Right.
so it's yeah, so I've always had fun with that. Yeah, I've never used more than a 3/4 inch line on an injection line, even on a whole house radiant.
Oh, yeah. And I've used less than that successfully. I've done,
Oh yeah,
not the whole house, but definitely remote zones using 1/2 inch packs.
which is 3H copper diameter. I mean, but yeah, it's because you need like 1 gallon a minute most of the time, and it's you can run that forever, and it's cheap.
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Anyway,
So
just a tip, cost saving.
yep. So now let's look at mixing valves and electric mixing valves. So on the left is a Tecmar, the new style Tecmar, which is I think is actually an SB. It requires an external control to tell it when to open and close. And on the right hand side is the Taco I valves that have the control built into it. So the I valves on the right, you supply 24 volt. It comes with an outdoor sensor. It comes with 2 sensors for supply and return for protection of the system. And of course, the 4-way valve comes with nothing except for you buy the body, you buy the head, and then you buy the control. Both work beautifully. Both are phenomenal. Both are a nice way to go. This is my most favorite to do when I need boiler protection, is to be able to use a 4-way valve. But with a 4-way valve, you do have to use primary, secondary circulation. You need to tell the water where to go. So if you would, Jason, launch poll number 3.
I got it. I got it.
God, I couldn't get that out. Jesus.
All right, Teddy, there you go.
All right. Using motorized valves, do you pick one of the following? Use Tecmar with Tecmar control, use SB with a third-party controller, or Taco I valves. 3 choices.
Take I valves, they rock.
Your percentage is up to 71.75 on the Taco I valves.
I'm trying to present it as a neutral presenter. I think when we say they rock, we tilt the boat.
Just a little bit. All right, where are we at? 71, say Taco I valve, they rock. And then 29% you say use Tecmar with the Tecmar control. It's a good choice. All right, I'm closing that pool. There you go.
Excellent. So, and the Tecmar controls, a lot of those are coming to you with other people's colors, whether it be green or red or orange. So, if you're buying controls from your radiant heat manufacturer, of course they're probably coming from somebody else. But I like the 4-way mixing valve. I don't like when people oversize them so they don't get a chance to operate and move. But let's look at a few systems using 2, 3, and 4 motorized valves. Here's one with 2 motorized valves going off the systems. Here's motorized Taco on this one. This was actually a job that Charles Mason did, where we had a pair of TFT 399s, a pair of S120 indirects, indirect water heaters, 2 closely spaced T's going off to 4 air handlers. And each one of these zones of radiant was supplying anywhere from 4 to 8 zones of radiant heat using the 2-way I valve. Dave lives very close and is a good friend with Charles. Thank you, with Charles Mason, and helped design this. And it was a beautiful use. So that's a 2-way valve. So now let's look at 3-way. So here's again going back to a 3-way valve. Here's our boiler. Here's our indirect. Here's 2 air handlers. Here's some baseboard, and here's your I valve going off to the system. Much like you would use the thermostatic 3-way, but now this is outdoor reset. And because we're using a condensing boiler, we do not have to build in any kind of bypass. We can direct that water directly back to the boiler. So that's the 3-way. Of course, here's a 4-way valve coming in. So again, using a NTI boiler, an indirect water heater, air handlers, and here's a 4-way motorized mixing valve supplying multiple zones of radiant heat. Now, a good rule of thumb is your your zones have to be plus or minus 10% to supply at one temperature, which means if all your zones need between 120 and 130 degrees, most of us in the design world go 110 to 130, or if you have another zone that goes 120 to 140 because it's staple up. These are things you have to look at for the number of mixing valves that you have to have. You might have some zones that only need 90-degree heat because it's a basement floor. You don't necessarily want to send that 130-degree heat on the coldest day. So another mixing valve might be in line. So here's a little system that we did that was kind of fun. This is multiple boilers with multiple zones or rating. As you can see, here's a baseboard zone that went through a third floor, so a high temperature zone here. Here's a 4-way mixing valve, 1 inch for 138-degree supply and returns. Then I had 120-degree supply returns, so you can see the difference. I got 138 max here, 120 degrees max here. Then at the very end, I threw in some snow melt through a plate heat exchanger coming back in. Magnetic return, of course, magnetic filter on the return. But in this particular system, of course, the boilers ran all the time, no matter what called. When the heating was calling, this circulator, which was just taken around the loop, was running. When the indirect called, it would turn off the pump on the loop and turn on the pump for the indirect. And vice versa, when the tank was satisfied, it would turn off and turn this pump back on, so it could supply temperature back out to all the mixed temperatures, giving you primary, secondary circulation. So kind of fun. So that's just the use of 4-way valves. And I can tell you that the 1 inch and the 1.25 inch valves are working very good. So now I'm going to take these out of some of the boiler manufacturers pages. So here you have a 2-way valve. Again, here you have your boiler security or your boiler protection with a 2-way injection valve. Supply sensor has to go in, outdoor sensor, of course. A 3-way valve, same way. 2 closely spaced T's, still the boiler pump, still a boiler sensor so we can protect that cast iron boiler from cold returns. Still a supply sensor so the valve knows where to travel to, and the outdoor sensor hooked up. Here's multiple 3-way valves with a multiple zone system where we have a system loop going through the boiler, protecting the boiler with boiler sensors. And here's the 3-way valve doing basically the same thing, going off to radiant heat with 2 high temperature zones. So that gives you the 3 ways. Let's look at the 4 ways real quick. So looking at the 4-way valves, here we have multiple zones going off for high temperature. You have a return temperature sensor here for the boiler to protect it, outdoor sensor, 4-way valve, and a sensor going at the supply. Again, this is for cast iron boilers, so you know what's going on. Then over here is the 4-way valve just going off and having your 2 closely spaced T's as normal, and a 4-way valve out here with 2 zones of radiant. So that gives you your input into the piping. Ted, you have anything to add before I go on?
I like it.
All right, so the I valve has reset built in. Of course, it's more effective, more efficient, more comfortable for your customer. Simple wiring and voltage. There is no wires on this valve that go back to the boiler, believe it or not, which is pretty cool. You can reset individual zones because you can buy these down to 1/2 inch. Boiler protection across the board because they come with the boiler sensor. And available in 2, 3, and 4-way models. I show these because this was something new to me, that I was using 4-way Tecmar and SB valves. A lot of people know me through Weersbo, which is where Ted and I met, now Uponor. I went on to be a large watts rating guy. But in between there, I brought Jan Anderson, Thomas Lenman, and myself brought Roth rating into town, which we used all SB valves on and SB controls. So real quick, I just wanted to throw this in because this is a great slide that David had made up. What does 0.8 mean on a reset curve? So just to take that whole reset thing out of your mind, that means that for every degree of drop outdoor, we raise the temperature going out to the floor 0.8. So where you guys are all trying to look at these curves and figure out, that's all the curve is, dude. It's just the rise of temperature based on outdoor temperature, drop in temperature and how much you rise. So that 0.8 is how much you rise. So anyway, move the dial on the valve to the correct ratio and you got it covered. Cool. Anyway, so this is it. I'm sorry?
Reset on it, moves it around as needed.
Exactly. So anyway, this is a neat little graphic that David had come up with, showing how easy it is to wire in the I valve. You have a C and an R going to it. You have a sensor, common sensor. Here you have your outdoor sensor, your supply temperature, and your boiler sensor all together. And Jason, I put this in because for you, because you like the little things to make little clicks, like there's the thermostat made, and there's the circulator coming on.
Yeah, it's funny.
And there's the boiler working.
It's funny. It's funny you say that, because I have this from when John and him used to do. Remember the piping setup when they used to do the whole. Dave said to me this. This must be a master drawing for them.
So,
that little pump.
I just want you to appreciate it because you love this drawing. And I just had to throw that in for you.
Matter of fact, I have this, the older version of this.
But Haldorf added to this the guy shoveling the fuel.
Yeah, I see that in the bag.
Yeah, little elf is working relentlessly in there. Must be cold out.
He's working his tail off in there.
Exactly. So on a call for heat, the circulator fires up, the condensing boiler fires, will fire when needed, and you get full or partial reset across the board with this. So it's all good stuff. So additional features that we look at, minimum max supply temperatures and water temperatures you can dial in. Minimum boiler return temperature set with a dip switch. You got 120 or 135, depending on whether it's gas or oil. Display disabled by not installing the boiler sensor. So if you don't want a boiler return, like you're using a condensing boiler, just don't put the boiler sensor on it and you don't have to worry about it. So it's pretty cool. And warm weather shutdown, 70 degrees on or off. I mean, you get to pick it. So here's the two-way valve. I have this because it's the only way I could get the CV factors. And now you remember the CV factor is your GPM at what? At 1 PSI a drop or 2.3 feet ahead. So you can see that the half-inch valve on the 2-inch, I mean on the two-way, has a much higher CV factor or a much higher flow factor based on pressure drop than a 3-way mixing valve. I mean, a 3-way thermostatic Honeywell mixing valve is a 2.6 CV, and here on the 3/4 inch valve we have 10.3. And you're not putting all the water through this. You're just putting the injection water through it. So remember how small that injection loop was using the circulator. Now we're going to be doing the same thing on the injection here for the sizing. So this is where it's important that you don't oversize your mixing valves. So it can handle higher flows with the right applications. Now I want to show you the 3-way here is on the top and the 4-way is on the bottom. Now I will tell you that when it comes to 4-way, the CV factors are about the same. When I compared this to the Tecmar and the SB, the CV factors were almost the same. But I just wanted to show you that the 1-inch swept valve will give you, in the 3-way, will give you up to 10 gallon a minute with 14 feet ahead. Now, if you remember, we had 9 feet ahead on that one job. So 9 feet ahead we were at on a 4-way valve. It's right here, and the CV of 4 on the 3-way mixing valve. So you have to be careful of how you size these things, right? So all your flows going through this now, all of it is right here. So now if we look at our 4-way is rated up to 20 gallon per minute, up to 1.25 inches. And your feet ahead at 20 gallon a minute is only 5.31. That's unbelievable. That's phenomenal flow. But the biggest thing, I'm sorry, Ted, go ahead.
Well, I'm probably anticipating something you're going to say, but it's important to note that if you really understand the flow, very often that valve is going to be smaller than the piping on either side of it. And the reason is you want it to be only as big as it needs to be so you have maximum rangeability. In other words, that has an ability to regulate. And if you oversize it, it only operates in a very small range. If you size it properly, the valve gets to operate through its entire range, and that gives it more control and also prolongs the life of the valve.
Well, and one of the biggest problems we saw with the cast iron 4-way valves from Tecmar was that people put these in, they sized them according to all the flow and what they thought they needed.
Right.
And the valve was only operating between 0 and 1, and it would form, and it's supposed to go 0 to 10, and
Right.
it would form this ledge of rust at one. And when it finally needed to get past one, you'd shear the pin going to the motor. And
Exactly.
and like the shear pin on your snowblower, guys. I mean, it would just shear it right off because that motor could turn your house around and it would just shear the pin off.
Well,
And that
range I was just talking about, you want to make sure that that valve can operate through its entire range. Otherwise, you end up with a problem like you just described.
always pick smaller, not bigger. How's that? Because when your worries get too big, you can buy this book, or just don't worry and get the smaller valve. So how's that? Do you like that, Jason? That book, I'm buying you that book, Jason, just so you know.
What book's this?
The book on your screen, dude.
I got something else up there. Hold on, I was looking at questions.
So anyway, so
Does this
motorized valves, advantages of them, and Ted, chime in at any time, of course. Advantages of a motorized mixing valve: you have greater flow rates, lower pressure drops. It can adapt to increase and decrease flow better. Outdoor reset built in, boiler protection when piped in properly. And they're compact based. When you size it against an injection pump that you need to have two closely spaced T's on either side, it does take up smaller space. Now, of course, it's not as good as an injection pump when you can use smaller pipe to get to another part of the house, but it's still there.
Steve,
Disadvantages?
Steve, before we go any further, got one thing I want. Tim Holmes throws this out there, kind of interesting. Design reverse return injection using my design system. Always my customers are wonder how many. Oh, I gotta make this a little bigger. I can't read it. Getting old.
So it's fun when the person reading the question can't read the question.
Yeah, I need to put my glasses on, get closer.
So traditionally, reverse return injection was used when you needed even
System
lower.
always from customers wondering how many know what this is. Yep. Okay, go ahead, Ted. You're on what he's asking, what he brought up. Go ahead.
I was going to say,
Reverse return.
right, reverse return injection or reverse return mixing was utilized primarily when you wanted to further reduce the flow going to the system. In other words, it was for very low demand.
Like for instance, in the vans that we use reverse return only because each boiler sees the same amount of temperature too.
Well, I'm talking about reverse return mixing as opposed to.
So Ted, why don't you tell people what the reverse return mixing is? Paint a picture in their head for them.
Well, so instead of coming back to, let's say, imagine you've got the primary loop and and picture that in your mind, your primary loop with the two closely spaced T's going out to an injection system, for instance, right?
Let me see if I can get that, because I had that one primary loop picture, Ted. Maybe that will help you, and you can tell them how it
And then-
differs.
Once you're done with that, Steve, I have another good question here.
Where is that? Sorry, guys.
No, this is good. This is
Why can't I find it? Give me a second. I'm going to
Go
stop
back a
sharing my
little bit.
screen so I can find it. You think it's back further?
yeah,
It's just a little, it's a
right before this.
tipping change. Yeah.
Oh, there it is. Yeah. So there's your primary loop. So this is the primary loop Ted's talking about right here.
Yeah, but we want to look at one where the boiler loop appears to be primary and we're taking closely spaced T's off of that. You have one?
Oh, yeah, I do
You have-
actually. Hold
You
on.
do have
That was, let me bring up, oh,
Like it's a boiler loop with multiple
I hate when
loads.
you click on something and it tells you can't do it.
I thought it was.
We can look at this. Look at
Type
this.
it on the bottom. I
Oh,
love
man,
it.
come on.
Hang on, hang on.
Here we go. Sorry, Ted. I was trying to bring up a slide sheet and it wasn't doing it.
Well, you go back to that drawing we were just looking at it. Well,
Uh-oh, I've lost everybody's audio.
okay.
It's typing what
Keep
he's saying.
talking, Ted. I can't hear a thing you're saying.
It's typing what you're saying on the bottom.
There we go.
There you go.
Yeah, keep going. That's no.
Somewhat.
I don't know if it's important enough for us to get down this far down in the weeds. It was a different piping trick that was used in particular injection situations. But in general, you have a much better range with just direct injection the way we pictured it tonight.
And Mike had a good question here. When the other one to follow up with that question is, how do you control the temp going to a snow melt system, leaving the plate exchanger? Few drawings back, but we lost a little Steve's audio.
What was can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now, Steve. Yep.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know what happened to my end. All my audio went out, so
That's
both
right.
coming and going.
Can you do me a favor, bud, and go back to the drawing where you were showing the snow melt going out of the plate exchanger?
Snow melt going out of the plate heat exchanger. Sure, I can.
Mike had a question on that about
Hold on.
how you're controlling it. There you
That was a colored picture somewhere.
It's coming. It's coming.
You can do it.
Going the wrong way. Sorry. I'm all nervous now. I lost my audio and it really upset me. There we go. This is the one you're talking about.
Yep, there it is.
Here's your snow melt over here. Here's your 4-8 mixing valve to one temperature to your lower temperature. Here's your snow melt to the higher temperature radiant. And here's your baseboard. All right. So what's the question?
Mike's question was, how did you control the temp going to the snow melt, leaving the plate exchanger?
I was using a 650 on this job. We used a 651 Tecmar control because they wanted Wi-Fi control and they wanted to have the outdoor reset based on the weather, so it would preload. So we used a 651 that had temperature sensors on the boiler sensor, on the return, on the supply of both the both sides of that plate heat exchanger, so we wouldn't freeze the plate. And then
You
set
said
it up.
651 to Steve, 651, right?
And a slab sensor probably too, right?
And it's, oh yes, of course, we use the 090, 091 slab sensor that was sitting out in the yard. Yep. So.
Okay,
No,
I'm putting that in the.
I believe that the 650 is the non-Wi-Fi and the 651 is Wi-Fi, so you can get the Wi-Fi weather. It could be 651, 652, but I'm 90% sure it's the 651's Wi-Fi. 650 is without Wi-Fi. And that, like I said, it preloads, so it thinks before, if National Weather says it's going to snow at 12 o'clock tonight, it starts preloading at 6 o'clock. So it's melting as it's falling, and you don't need to supply 250 BTUs a square foot to do that because you're already preloading.
I'm pulling it up now. All right, good. That answered his question. I'm assuming I sent the answer to your answer to him. So good to go.
Cool.
All right, sorry about that.
It will also control that loop to keep that heat exchanger from freezing.
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
Because you want to preload the heat exchanger before you bring back freezing water to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, unless you turn off the frost protection. You can't do that.
So.
Yeah.
Only one boiler.
So it's an amazing control, an amazing system. I can say that system's been in operation for 1.5 years now, like all the systems I've shown you tonight, and they're all successful and they're all working perfectly fine. So happy customers across the board. Good. All right.
All right.
Let me get back to where we were, because Jason, you know what it's time for?
It's time for a poll question. Let me guess.
Poll question number 4.
All right, here you go. Rock on, Teddy.
Okay, so what are the two main purposes of a mixing valve? Comfort and control, water temperature control and boiler protection, to build value into the system and save the customer money, or lack of callbacks and free beer.
I'm sorry, Ted, you said free beer?
Again, not trying to influence the vote.
You said free beer?
I may have said that twice, yeah.
I bet I can make you say it again.
Free beer.
So what do we got, Jason?
All
Okay.
right. There you go, Teddy.
What do we got, Ted?
I can't read the results. I don't know what's going on.
They're moving. All right, 33% say comfort and control. 56% say water temperature control the boiler. 11% say lack of callbacks and free beer.
So
Who's got that 11%?
So I can say this, gentlemen, and ladies, that whatever you said, you're 100% correct, because we want to control the temperature going out to the system. we're going to protect the boiler. And by doing that, we're going to give the customer better comfort. We're going to give them a better system, and we're going to do supply temperature set and boiler temperature protection, and you're all good to go. So this is this screen, and I put in my humble opinion up here because this is my opinion and nobody else that's on this panel, of how I feel about mixing valves. If you haven't picked it up yet, manual or thermostatic valves should never be used. Thermostatic only when you have a small, easy, finite system like a bathroom maximum, because they want it warm all the time. Injection pumps when large flow is needed, or when you want to get to the other end of the house, when money's not an issue. Two-way, three-way, and four-way valves with external controls. If Wi-Fi is needed, because you can buy a TechMark control that you can now adjust the temperature to your floors. If readily available, because chips are not out there. And I valves, in my own humble opinion, at the price of an I valve, a two-way, a three-way I valve is very close to the price of a three-way thermostatic valve. You should use them every single time. Easy to wire, easy to pump, easy to play, easy to do everything.
Let me ask you, I mean, a three-way I valve is simply a three-way valve. I mean, it's just, it comes as a package as opposed to having to, put in a valve and a control.
Correct, or a thermostatic valve, Ted, because a thermostatic valve, which is three-way, is nearly the same price as a 3/4 inch I valve.
Well, exactly. So why wouldn't you go for the one that gives you control as opposed to this one you called stupid earlier, rightly so?
Well, and the funny thing is people's pushback was, well, I don't know how to wire them. Well, all you have to do is put 24 volt to it and attach your outdoor sensor. And if you need your supply and return sensors, of course, you need a supply sensor so it knows what it's doing. And if you need boiler protection, you have to put a boiler sensor on it. And that's it. You don't have to talk to the boiler at all. Amazing. Which also means it's going to open and close during the summertime to exercise itself. When you don't have any temperature going through it, it's going to open and close completely to keep itself free and clear. Plus,
every so many hours or so many days, it exercises, and that's a great thing, so you don't get that locked up feeling in the fall.
Exactly. So with that, gentlemen.
Thanks for watching the video today. If you'd like to check out more videos, see the link below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for all the future updates. And also check us out on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram.